Hello, I'm Josh Wilkinson and welcome to Chatting, presented by Made.
Hello, can you please introduce yourself and your job role?
Of course I can. So my name's Abby Hellam. I'm 27 years old. I'm originally from Blackpool, but I've lived in Manchester for 5 years now. For the past 2 years, I've been a production administrator at Factory International.
Oh, right. Well, I can't wait to unpack all of that. First question being, what do you enjoy about your job? And also, what has been maybe a highlight of your job so far? So maybe thinking about some of the key points, but really just giving a taste of what you do.
So I think for me, it's seeing artistic projects develop from those kind of early ideas up until the point of where it starts being shown as a public show for the public. That's something that I'm just really interested in. So seeing like the artists talk about their initial idea and then working that through with a producer and seeing all of the ins and outs of the production team and how those conversations move to eventually something being, in the middle of Manchester or on a stage or, like public art, immersive stuff, like the variety of stuff we do is probably the most exciting part about it.
I love to hear when I chat to people on here and they talk about their role, but they have that clear like passion for it and also that interest. Because I think without that, it's difficult, isn't it, to get up every day. But with what you've said, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about it later on. But I'm interested to know now, going into that role, what kind of things did you take from your time at college and university? Maybe the more practical, vocational skills that we sort of all do pick up at that time, but don't necessarily put on our CV as a skill or a tool. What kind of things did you take from that time into the role that you have now?
I think that's a really important thing to talk about because I feel like there's always the things that you learn actually on your course, but it's the stuff that you're learning outside of that because of the context of where you are that ends up being the most valuable, especially if you want to get into like live events, live performance, and those kind of staged activities for people. I did a music degree, so I'd done performing arts at school when I was doing my GCSEs. Went on to do drama and music when I was at college, and then did a music degree. And obviously, that was mainly kind of focused more academically. So it was like writing music and performing music, and the history of music and all that kind of context. But actually, being in the room with people who were like-minded and had the same interests and wanted to do the same things was the most valuable part of that, and actually just getting to be part of those conversations. So a lot of the experience that ended up being relevant later on when I was looking for jobs was that stuff that I did outside with my friends.
And so as you said, you went through that and you had those side hobbies, I suppose, that contributed to all the skills that you have now and that you use so often. Before we talk about how you use those skills in the role you have now and find a little bit more about the day-to-day of your role, what was your pathway then from education? So you were at high school, again, just tell us about your college experience on paper as well as university, if you went to university.
So I grew up in Blackpool, and I was really lucky that there was a local high school that had like arts as their specialism. So that was really, really great. You know how they have like a sports college and a maths college. I was really lucky that there was a performing arts high school, so they had a real kind of passion for making sure that the arts would reach all of us as kids and be involved, and it was really great. So when I was initially doing my options for GCSE, because I remember I wanted to take all of them. I wanted to do dance, drama, and music. And so many teachers kind of that were outside of the performing arts were like, "Oh, are you sure? Are you sure you want to do all those?" But yeah, I was really sure. I knew that it was what I was interested in. I knew that it was what I wanted to do. And I think it's so important that you choose what's interesting to you and what you get enjoyment from, because it starts you on pathways if you start going down certain routes because you pick something that you're interested in, and then it leads you to the next step and the next step. So I did music, dance, and drama as part of my GCSE options. Then I went on to the sixth form college, that was Blackpool sixth form, and did theatre studies there, which was kind of moving on from GCSE drama, where we were putting on small productions and kind of working and putting together work. Whereas theatre studies was a little bit more production based. and we would think more about the staging and more about the lighting and of what we had available to us in a college, which is often small scale, but it was more of that wider picture. And I realized that was when I started to get really into, oh, we should do a production schedule for this, and oh, we should have a meeting about this, and oh, we should discuss these things, and what's our direction, what's our aim for this, and what pool of money do we have? We've got 20 quid. What can we do with 20 quid to get our props together? And it just gets you into that kind of mindset and moving forward. And like I started to realize that was what I really like.
What I really hear from you is, sometimes when you do when you get a maybe more academic. When I say more academic, I mean, if you go into like accounting or something and you're looking at a maths degree and you're looking at how it's very much on paper, I think when you think of college and university, you also think about the exams. You think, is it going to be like a BTEC, or are we doing exams? Are we doing practical work? But what's really interesting is that it sounds like your experience has been really wove together with the fact that, you had these practical tasks that you did that gave you those chances to be able to think for yourself a little bit, but also really farm these things that are true to your job role now, going into like the real world and doing that work, which I think is really, really important. And I think more so having that creative conversation, that space to creatively problem solve has done you quite well in going into the career that you have now. I think even if you weren't necessarily in a creative organization now, those creative problem solving skills seem to have been exercised to a level that you were like, oh yeah, I can try those out anywhere I go. Would you agree that that's
I'd say so, yeah. So especially when I started in this job, so I didn't really know what a producer did before. I knew that must exist as a thing within the industry, like the more that I was learning about it. But I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what it meant to be a producer. And I'd kind of been interested in that whole, like, oh, how can we make stuff happen? How do you take steps to put on a production? How do you step back from the end result and keep moving backwards? And what's the timeline of that? Like, when do you talk to this person? When do you talk to a venue? And it was kind of like lived experience of learning those things, either through college and putting on like small shows and productions in college as part of my A-level course and stuff like that. And then outside of that, of like, oh, I want to do a gig with some friends, like all of that experience of how do you put together something in a process. So then when I started working for Production International, and I learned much more about what a producer does, it kind of shaped that whole thing for me. I was like, oh, this is the role that I'd be really interested in going into in the future, but I just hadn't known the name for it before. And I think that's such a true thing of a lot of arts-based jobs. Of people don't necessarily know how many different roles there are in an organization that puts together, a performance on stage or some public artworks, or, they don't think about all the different people that are in there. I think especially we were chatting before and saying about when you're taking your GCSE options, like a few people had sort of said to me that were older than me at the time, like, oh, but if you take music, where will that put you in the future? And I was like, well, I'm interested in it, and I want to go into this as a career. And people like, oh, as a performer, and I'd be like, well, I don't know. I think there's more outside of that. And it was only when I kind of got into an industry that I realized just how wide all those different job roles exist.
Yeah.
There isn't just the person on the stage, because there's so many people that are involved with making that happen, from from like the people that you kind of think of as more visible, of like stage managers and lighting managers and the director and all those kind of creative teams. But there's also hundreds of people in the front house of the venue, like putting it all together.
Yeah.
And you've got like people doing the administration part of it and doing the invoices and making sure that there's a schedule that everybody follows and sharing that around, and making sure that there's there's stuff in dressing rooms for people, and making sure that it's gone for a planning meeting, and who has discussed this, and where's it been put through, and how do we fund this as a project. There's so many steps to it.
Can you share what you do? Almost, you don't have to give us a full breakdown because it might take a while, but your day-to-day of what you do, and remind us of the title that you have as well of your job role.
Yeah, so I'm a production administrator, which sits within the producing team within the organization. So there's a team of producers, and the producers are people who hold the budgets, they have conversations with the creatives, and they develop that idea from the early stage up to the point where it gets put on, and they have all those conversations with front of house people, technical people, development, fundraising type people. It's all of those, they're kind of holding all of those conversations and all of those processes. Then the production administrator in our organization is the person who supports that from an administrative level. So it can be things like, it can start with things as basically as taking the minutes and taking the notes and making sure that you're keeping track of everything that's been discussed. When a contract gets put together, we might draft that with the producer and put that in so we can see that process of what's being agreed and then get that signed, make sure that that's filed and you're following the process all the way through. It can be there's a rehearsal happening for 10 dancers need a rehearsal space in a couple of months' time. They're going to be in Manchester for these dates. Can you find us a venue? And we'll go around and we'll talk to different venues and see what's available at different times. So it's all that kind of researchy, administrative, the nuts and bolts that hold something together of like I was going to say pen and paper, but it's much more Dropbox and documents now. But it's all those kind of nitty gritty things that hold it all together to make sure that everyone else can do their role and you're supporting all of that.
When do you think you use, where do you most use those creative skills we were talking about that you may have found, those vocational skills, those practical skills from your education, but also just generally from the practice that you have creatively outside of that job role you have at Factory International? Where do you think they come in with your day to day? Do you ever have moments where you go, right, creative problem solve time, or where does that come in?
It comes into certain levels. So there's things like everyone kind of ends up having an area of art that they're particularly interested in, but obviously we all support quite a lot of different projects. So I'm across dance things, I'm across like visual arts things, but my main focus is in music. So I feel like music and venues and that kind of operational side of it is where my kind of knowledge sits a lot of the time. So sometimes it can be that kind of experience that you've got from your own background of the things that you're interested in that end up helping with the problem solving stuff later down the line. Like you might be working with a producer that is mainly visual arts, but then you've got some musicians that you need to bring on, and you might be the person who says, oh, we need to make sure we've got music stands, which sounds like such a small thing, but then it's just making sure that you're pooling everybody's skills and experiences from all the different things everyone's interested in.
What I'm really interested in talking about with this set of interviews is what your interview process was like. What was it like interviewing for this role? And also, what did you find maybe the employer was looking for? What was it like as an experience?
So as a person, I find interviews quite daunting. I always get really, really nervous. And I think that's completely normal. So many people do get really nervous, and that's fine. The way that it was kind of split up for my last job interview for this role was kind of 3 main questions about the experience that I'd done in the past, either in a work context or out of a work context. What skills could I feel I could bring to a job? Then it was also split with a practical task. So if you feel like you're not always great at explaining yourself verbally, there is normally a practical thing in there as well, which I think you don't know until you've done a couple of interviews. And for me, that's the part that I always get really comfortable in, because it's something that I can tangibly get my hands into and show that I can do a task. So my interview, it was 3 questions. One of them was kind of situational focus of what would you do if this happened in a situation, which is always a really interesting one, because it's not often that you'll have been in that situation, but you've got to kind of think like, oh, well, what would I do if I was in? And I think that's a lot of what employers look for, is that kind of problem solving of not necessarily did you answer it in the most fully way, but were you able to think about, okay, well, what would I do? What would I try and do? And go through that process in that second. And I think that's what people are interested in seeing.
Like you say, if you're really interested in music and you're really interested in playing an instrument, for example, it's also looking at how these other roles exist. Like, you're a prime example of that, of how you can also work on your musical side whilst also doing your role at Factory International, and how they almost go hand in hand, but also that interest keeps on going for you, which I think, a great bit of advice. Also, I was sort of leading on from that, because I think it goes really nicely into it. What would you say, why is it important for, I don't know, I suppose for anyone to be getting a role in the creative industry? Like, why is it important that we even have a creative industry?
I think if it's something that you're interested in, the more that you can learn about that and give back to it, it's going to keep going. I think the creative industry is something that's, you know, it's a really interesting place to work. You'll always be doing different things. Your day is never going to be the same every single day because there's always new things coming along the line. And you're going to have to respond to things changing, because I think something that's really exciting, it's challenging, but it's exciting about the creative industries is that unexpected things happen. Things change along the line and you have to respond to it and do something different. And that's actually, it's a challenge, but it's exciting. It's a really cool thing to be a part of, because you've got a set day of this show is happening on this day. It probably can't move. It's going to happen on this day. If you encounter a challenge, that's an exciting thing to overcome of, well, how are we going to get to the finish line after that? And yeah, and it can be from anything. It can be all sorts of different scales of things of, oh, how are we going to make sure that 50 ounces get paid on time? Like, it seems like a really small, but it's really important. It's really important that all of those things happen to make sure that the full thing happens at the end of it.
Yeah.
You know, we've got this amazing idea for a production, and it's going to happen, and we've got this amazing idea. Here's the choreographer, fantastic show. Where's it going to happen? Let's find out. Let's go and find somewhere for it to happen. Like, all of those kind of problem solving, it's never the same. It's always something new, and you get to learn about new things all the time. And
Yeah,
I think it's really nice to be part of the industry where you're constantly learning new things.
it's been really, really interesting to hear about your role, and also the work that you do and the passions that you have. And it genuinely has been a real insight into how, you know, and why some of those creative skills that we have and we maybe take for granted are really useful and actioned in the creative industry. So thanks so much for sharing that and joining us for a chat.
Oh no, thank you so much. It's been really great to talk to you, and I hope it was helpful.